Hello, and welcome to the Best Practices and Proven Methodologies for Mobile Performance Testing, brought to you by Vivid. Today our sponsor is HP. I'm Brian Pohl. I'm your host for today's session. Today's presenters are Todd DiCapro, who is the Senior Product Marketing Manager with HP, Shane Evans, who is a Senior Project Manager at HP, and Sylvia Sequeira, who is also a Senior Product Marketing Manager with the HP. We'll start off with just a little housekeeping. Today's session is being recorded live. All recordings will be available to all Vivid members, and also will be available to everyone on today's call, and the slides will also be available. We will be having a question and answer session at the end of the presentation, so please type your questions into the questions pane. If you look, when you select the question, up in the upper right-hand corner is usually where the control panel is for the GoToMeeting, where you can see the buttons to select for asking and submitting questions to the panelists. With that, I'll turn the session over to Sylvia for starting. Everyone, please enjoy the session.
Yes, thank you so much, Brian. And it's a pleasure to be here with you guys today and talk about mobile performance. I'm attending Start Canada, and there is so many going on, many information topics about mobile, the difficulty, the challenge, and that's what we're bringing to you today, best practices and proven methodologies in how to do the mobile performance testing. And what I would like to do is just to talk a little bit about what we are going to cover today. Next slide, please. Our agenda. We are going to basically talk about how to do mobile performance. We're going to talk about a number of case studies as well, and how you can collect very good ROI or prove a very good ROI of business value in terms of implementing that. But before we start, and before even diving in, I would like even to make a very good and great announcement. I'm not sure if all of you guys are aware about, but HP on April 1st, we just announced the acquisition of Shenra Technology. And then this basically provides now our end-to-end mobile performance testing, and as well adds on in terms of capabilities for network virtualization for performance testing and combined with service virtualization. We're going to have several webinars following this regarding to this new acquisition of technology and how our technology works with. But today we are going to start talking about a little bit in how that can help your solutions, your needs, your challenges as well. And before also handing to the main presenters, I'd like just to know a little bit more about our audience today. And I have two questions that I would like to run here for you so we can know a little bit more about you. So I have a poll question number 1. And I would like to just ask you, are you currently involved in mobile performance testing? So let me launch the question here for you guys. And then you guys can, yeah, perfect. You can answer now. And let's see here the results. So are you absolutely doing mobile performance testing? You're starting to get involved in some projects, or you're not doing it all? So let me see here the results. I have around 70% people that voted. I think that's a good number here, right? So the answer is basically we have 12% of the people that is currently doing very active mobile testing. We have 58% that's getting involved in some projects, not actively, and there is 30% that's not doing anything. But you know, that's a great start. I would say being in this webinar, we can discuss and get you going. So that's very good to know. And I have another question here for you guys. Let me just go to the second question. So The next question, actually. Okay, there you go. What does, my second question, actually, okay. What does mobile application failure mean for you? So it's just an application that's slow or does not work, when the customer abandons the application, when there is loss of revenue, when there is impact on the brand for you, or no, all the above. So what that means when your mobile application fails. So we have some people voting here. Yeah, I want a little bit more, getting to know you guys. Yep, perfect. I have around 70%, a little bit more, yeah. Just vote now so we can get to know you. Yeah, so that's what I kind of thought. You know, most of everyone here, let's see the results now. Most of everyone, 82%, said that all the above. Yeah, exactly. So the application doesn't work, the customer abandoned the application, there is loss of revenue, and also impact to the brand. So those are some of the, I would say, major failures, what that means for you guys. So that's great to get to know you guys. And then with that, I'm going to jump now with the presentations. So let's go. I'm going to hand to Shane.
Thanks, Sylvia. So hi, everyone. Shane Evans. I'm the product manager for HP LoadRunner here at HP. And I'm joined with Todd DiCaprio, who has joined us from Shunra. And we've done a number of presentations in the past about how do we test mobile applications so that our customers don't abandon us for our competitors. And it's a really tough challenge these days. Customers have very little patience when it comes to mobile technology. It could have something to do with, you know, you've got this device in your pocket. It's very personal, so you check it quite frequently. And when things don't work for you, you're very quick to move on. Studies show that within a quarter of a second, so 250 milliseconds, a user's attention is gone elsewhere if there's no response back from the application. So there's a lot of pressure to perform, and this is the first experience any customer has with your application is how well the application performs. So today we're going to talk about how do we approach mobile performance, and it basically breaks down to three key areas. Number one, that's virtualization, which we'll cover in quite a bit of detail. There's the scenarios that we test themselves. So how do we represent our end users and our different customer bases and geographies? And then how do we build in incremental and continuous results throughout testing? So first, let's look at virtualization. Here's a good representation of any modern application in a very simplistic form. Studies show that any mobile application represented by, I think it was 36, Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, distinct services that make up that application. So we're talking about connections to mapping systems or to Facebook, other third-party feeds, for example, and a lot of APIs that are being pulled in from various services and resources, both within the organization and outside of our control. So in this simplistic example, we have things like the network and mobile carriers that are outside of our control, third-party services out in the cloud or maybe connected through firewalls. We have the ISPs, content delivery networks. And within our own corporate network, we might have what we would consider traditional application services, such as web servers, app servers, databases. But we also have web services that are, again, maybe outside of the control of our team or our organization, connected from within the firewall. And some of those systems aren't even available for testing. In many cases, we're not able to accurately represent these systems during our performance testing so that we can drive out performance bottlenecks earlier in the application lifecycle. So there's a lot of risk, a lot of assumptions being made about how these services will perform. Likewise, even the mainframes and back-end systems of record themselves aren't always built to scale I know very few customers that actually have a full-scale network or application and services available for performance testing. So this represents additional challenges. The answer here is that we want to virtualize wherever possible and remove some of those assumptions, some of those dependencies on the third-party and distributed systems that maybe are outside of our control. So we introduce first virtual users or user virtualization to generate the load of the applications, because simply put, it's very difficult for anybody to get the number of people together to generate the types of load that we need in our test environment so that we can accurately measure and improve performance. Second, we want to eliminate the variance and dependency on mobile carriers in our testing. In most customer-facing applications, we need to test against a very wide variety of mobile carriers in different technologies, different devices. And in order to do that, we need to capture, understand, and then virtualize those network conditions. And the third thing is service virtualization. And this is accomplished through one of many solutions, but HP's providing this through HP Service Virtualization, a relatively new product in our portfolio that can help to virtualize those third-party dependencies, whether they're based in the cloud or internally, web services, or even some of the legacy MQ or mainframe systems. Todd, anything you wanted to add here?
Yes, and Shane, thank you for doing a great job on this one. I think what's important to highlight here, and again, I'm thinking about this from a practical, hands-on, how-to mobile performance perspective, and thinking about virtualization. I mean, this has been one of the age-old challenges that we've all had as practitioners, is how is it that we can quickly and easily and, quite frankly, cheaply be able to recreate our production environments in pre-production. We've all tried a number of different ways, but this virtualization piece, or what I've called the three-legged stool, is really a way that we've seen our customers be able to leverage these capabilities by, to virtualize your users, again, through vUsers, or using something like HP Service Virtualization to virtualize these services, and then all the little gray lines in between are the networks that are dependent for all these systems to communicate. Again, that's where leveraging network virtualization comes into play. The number that you were looking for early on there, Shane, was Forrester in 2013 had stated that there was on average 38 discrete services per mobile app that were being called. And you'll remember back in June at HP Discover Las Vegas, Shane and myself and another practitioner in the industry who had just finished testing their first mobile app actually said that in his mobile app, which was a large insurance company in the U.S., they had over 120 discrete services just in the one app. So this was very relevant for him, and thought that from a practical, hands-on, how-to mobile performance, this was a critical element that we absolutely needed to cover in this conversation.
Right. And in the end, it's really about resolving dependencies, eliminating assumptions, and making sure that we're testing those things that are in our control, so that we can test both in the positive scenario with all of these network and services that are outside of our control operating as it should, but also the negative scenario. What if the network conditions are poor? What if the services that are being provided are not performing optimally or up to their SLAs? And we have the power, the flexibility to use both network and service virtualization in order to do that. Let's look at a scenario then. Todd, maybe you can help walk us through this one.
Absolutely. So this is one of the scenarios that I, as a practitioner, had the opportunity to work on hands-on, and this is a very large U.S. bank. And what I wanted to quickly help people to understand is what could be seemingly very complex, but is how to build your load scenario, especially given that we just talked through leveraging virtualization, specifically the virtual users, and then let's think about this virtual network. So this large U.S. bank said, okay, I've got a customer base that is predominantly U.S.-based. However, I know that they travel, and when they travel, they want to be able to log into their mobile app and do their banking. So how is it that I can recreate that exact scenario in my load and performance test? So as Shane, you build this out for me a little bit, let's click the next build. And what you'll start to see is, and we'll hold it for right here, just so I can help explain this before it gets to be very confusing. But thinking about their end users, they first had to say, well, what geographies are my end users in, and what does that concentration of end users look like? So this is what that organization had done. So for example, in Seattle, they said roughly 15% of our end user base is in that hub. And then you can see how it went through Los Angeles, Denver, Chicago, et cetera. And then they had a few international cities of London and Tokyo where, again, it was a smaller percentage given this was a U.S.-based bank, but they wanted to be able to have that as a representative sample size. Off to the right, this bubble that pops off, what you can see is they're now also saying, okay, let's think about the networks that these individuals are connecting over. So, for example, in Philadelphia, where 20% of their end users were based, you can see they then broke it into, okay, we had some broadband users at home, we have some mobile users on a 3G connection, a 2.5G connection, other enterprise users that are based in a headquarters location, and then also some that would be in a distribution center. So being able to now look at your load scenario and configuring it in a way that by leveraging virtual users and virtual network capabilities, you're now able to recreate this exact scenario in your pre-production environment to run it to be like it's going to be in production. So you build this out, you're going to see a number of other colors come into play. But thinking about this from a practical, hands-on, how-to mobile performance, this enables you to bring all these different mobile user types as well as your existing other users and build that into your overall load scenario. So again, a critical element that I wanted to touch on. It can be very complex very quickly, but I think talking through it in this example hopefully helps you to understand it and why it's important and how you can use it in your practical day-to-day. The next slide, I walk into a little bit more on the...
Sorry, before we move on, yeah, I just wanted to highlight here that this looks complex. We've got a number of different groups, different geographies, different network conditions for each of them, but it doesn't have to this doesn't make it complex necessarily. If you look at each of these bubbles that has mobile users, broadband users, these can be leveraging the same virtual user groups and the same virtual user scripts that we created. So we might have a central set of use cases that we're working through in our virtual user scenarios that we just replicate amongst all of these different groups and geographies and network conditions. So it's actually very simple to build this scenario out. It only takes a couple of scripts, and then we simply set the network conditions for each of these as we understand them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Shane. Thanks for clarifying that. You can reuse those scripts, just add different components to it for the network virtualization piece. So another area that, as Shane and I and Brian and Sylvia are all out there is, how is it that we can build in this incremental and continuous results? So I wanted to provide you with a slide that, we've put together to, when we go out and work with our customers and our prospects, they can connect with immediately. So first starting with, hey, we're in our early stage development. We want to start doing some testing. So we want to be able to test on any network, anywhere in the world, on their device, with some sort of interactive, hands-on capability, providing immediate feedback, also doing automatic or automated analytics and automated optimization recommendations. So HP Network Virtualization has a standalone product which is targeted for mobile, and this capability will enable you to do exactly this piece. So here's how, as a best practice and a practitioner, you could then adopt and say, okay, I want to deliver this type of incremental and continuous results. Here's how you can do it. Go ahead, Shane. I'm sorry, can you go back one, please? Thank you. So as we would move left to right, then bringing in this single user functional and performance test. So perhaps you've got some cloud devices, or perhaps you have a few devices in your lab that you want to be able to harness together. Then being able to do some sort of scripting around that. So whether you're using something like UFT to do your scripting, or some other types of products that might be out there, again, leveraging network virtualization in that scenario will then give you the ability to run your single user functional and some performance tests, now by introducing maybe a single user in LoadRunner to run through one single test, fully automated, to give you this result. Again, as you kind of start going just a little bit further down that life cycle, maybe you're getting some early stage builds that you're running in a BVT environment, in a build validation test, and you want to get some immediate feedback to that team as to how it's functioning and performing across different devices or just simply different mobile networks. And then the last one here to the right is load and performance tests. So some of this is what Shane and I were just talking through in the example of how to build your load scenario and configure it, and those capabilities of what you might be able to do. The last bullet on here is, I think, critical. So it's one that many of our customers have started to adopt, which is being able to run that load and performance test with the virtual users while running whatever your top 10 devices are with a functional and performance test concurrently. So again, think about it. You're now driving your pre-production environment with a load and performance test as you normally would, and then concurrently kicking off this automated mobile test to have those additional devices being able to run as additional single users on physical devices. It may also be something where we've seen our customers bring their UAT tester in and say, great, I want you to run a test on this device. And again, now with network virtualization, you have the ability to recreate that device anywhere in the world at any time on any network. But it's going to be as if it were running a full load scenario on the back end concurrently, so that the end user, which could be maybe your business leader, could be your VP of Dev, your VP of Ops, but give them that device in their hands, allow them to run it while your load and performance test is running, so they can get what that actual response is going to feel like. All right, Shane, I think we're ready to move on to a number of use cases and references. I know there was 3 of them that we're planning on highlighting today.
Sure.
So as you can see, there's 3 use cases and references that Shane and I kind of poured through many of the ones that we use and said, let's look at a digital entertainment service, also automotive manufacturing and pharmaceuticals, and seeing the number of people that were participating today, thought these would be most relevant for the conversation. We are going to kind of roll through them quickly. Again, this is recorded, and you'll see that we've just highlighted what we think are the important results that, as I think about it from a practical perspective, I would want to have to be able to carry forward with my team. So, Shane, let's go into the digital entertainment service example. So looking at this customer success story, there's a few different elements, but the first one, and this example was really around the slide that Shane talked through about using virtual users, using service virtualization, and then adding network virtualization. So that's exactly what this customer did. By doing that, what they were able to get is this growing ability to do more testing prior to production. So they had been doing about 80% of their testing in production, and again, from a production incident perspective, this was a very bad thing, and they're starting to see some of the negative impacts to revenue as well as their brands and also a loss of customers. So we were able to flip-flop that by bringing this capability in, or all 3 of those legs of the stool, now being able to do 80% of their testing prior to production. The other thing that was interesting is they were able to do 2 to 3x the amount of test cases that they did in the same amount of time. So they're getting more test coverage and more value from this capability as a result. Again, this is slashing defects in production, and again, they've run a number of different metrics and continue to measure that value that they're delivering to the business as a result. The next one that we'll look into is a leading automotive manufacturing organization. This one happens to be out of Europe, and is a case that's more based around mobile. There were some significant issues when they deployed their app out there, and again, it was around automotive manufacturing, but they were able to actually cut costs by over $500,000 annually just by reducing these performance-related production incidents and the associated remediation costs. So this was one that, again, when I was a day-to-day practitioner running a testing organization, I was very familiar with the number of production incidents, the number of people that I had, what their costs were, and the average number of days per production incident, because it was critical to see how I could impact that by reducing it, by increasing the quality. The other thing that was very interesting is, so we helped them to save over $500,000 annually just in reducing the number of performance issues in production. However, they also identified that by leveraging network virtualization even further within their LoadRunner install, that they found another opportunity for another $1.5 million in annual revenue. And again, this was just through their mobile channel. So again, a lot of that was due to some of the bits that Shane had introduced us to earlier, with those milliseconds of delay causes less transaction conversion rates and also more abandonment by your customers. So again, looking at this one example of this leading auto manufacturer is another example that I think is important for us to look at from a practical how-to guide. The last one that I wanted to look at was a very large international pharmaceutical company, and the key element here is by introducing network virtualization, and this was kind of that shift left of being able to introduce it early. So as you're in that late development stage, kind of into your BVT environments, and you're running these early tests, what they realized was saving 4 man-weeks per project for over 400 projects annually. So this was a significant savings that they identified. And again, it was all by doing more testing earlier and being able to get these results of performance earlier, and especially with these network conditions in mind, to be able to drive, again, more value out faster to their customers. So again, 3 very quick examples and case studies that I wanted to make sure we covered today for you. And I think from a practical perspective and thinking about mobile, these 3 examples kind of cover 3 different perspectives, but would be great references that as you are building this capability within your teams, and again, knowing that based on the survey, 82% see all of the above as a mobile app failure. It was interesting that 0% thought that this was 0% of customers abandoning the app. That, to me, is a significant one. But the other piece is 30% of you are not doing it yet, and 58% of you are getting involved. So that 58% number is actually almost identical to what the World Quality Report found this past year. So again, we sounds like we have a great sample size on the phone with us, Shane. I don't know if you want to start walking us into some of this ROI and business value. We can maybe get started on the business side and walk through it together.
Sure. Yeah, so looking at the business value, I think it's, we'd said a few things earlier that are pretty relevant to most customers or most companies who are delivering mobile apps, and we can all kind of speak to the business value. But mobile customers are closer to the system of engagement than any time in the past. So there's a direct translation to that mobile engagement and our customer success, our revenue. So being connected to those customers in a relevant way that provides value to them is extremely critical. We had an example last year, and I won't mention the company name, but of a financial services organization that put out a mobile app just for kind of a good-natured community service, and it had nothing to do with their financial services provided as a bank, but more for, I think it was renting those community bicycles throughout town. And the response was so poor that it actually damaged their business. So even though it didn't have a direct relationship with the financial services they were offering, it did impact their bottom line. So that's an important negative kind of example, but there's plenty of positive examples where companies are increasing engagement through mobile and therefore increasing revenue, increasing pipeline and sales activities and that sort of thing.
Shane, the example that you gave is perfect, and I guess this wheel, as it's illustrated here, this was something to, it's called Howtogomo.com, but one of the stories that they had done looks at these 5 different facets. So as a practitioner and you're thinking about mobile, we can get caught up in all the geeky and nerd knobs and technology and tools and everything else. But I think what's important is that as we're thinking about this strategy, let's keep some pretty key points in mind. And starting with business value is a great place. So you can see the little phone in the upper left corner. It's the blue illustration. So this is thinking about through calls. So the calls that come into your business as a result of your mobile app. It's interesting to see how that can potentially drive more calls. The other one is, in the right star, is apps. So how is it that your apps within your mobile channel are driving value into your business? Also, a mobile site, what does that do for you? How about cross devices? So again, all these different aspects of mobile and what it drives for your business through calls, apps, in-store, the mobile site, and cross-device. How does that build into your strategy for mobile? So again, let's think about that from a business value, and then as we start to build this out a little bit more, what does that look like from ROI? And as we roll into the next slide, we're really looking at this from a technology perspective and what is that internal value to the organization. So there's a few different facets that I like to look at. We looked at the business one. Well, now let's look at the technology one. So, do you have some sort of calculator within your organization that looks at this, savings that's possible? What is that ROI? What is the summary? What is the impact to your organization from a business perspective, from a technology perspective, and ultimately to the customer, which I also learned this past week, not only could it be your end customer out in the market, but it could also be your end customer as an employee, which is an important one that, again, thinking about that internal value, how is it you're calculating the ROI of what you do every day to be able to then share that back to all of your customers and stakeholders? The next slide is looking at customer value. I always like to reference to some different types of case studies. This one I'll reference a case study that was done by Adidas. And there's a few built in here, so why don't we start with the first one, and I'll kind of talk you through this case study because I think it's very relevant for this conversation. So as we build the first component on, what you will see is Adidas started looking at things like, okay, I've got a mobile app, and I know the number of clicks that I have. Well, how many store locator clicks on that app actually lead to an in-store visit? And what Adidas found, it was actually for every 5 clicks, 1 person went to go visit the store. Now, I know that's not relevant to how I use the store locator because normally if I'm out on the road and I'm looking for a store, it's because I'm going to go buy something there. But again, this was this case study and what they found. Of those store visitors, 20% of them actually made a purchase. So again, let's think through this model that they're now starting to build out for us. And then the average order value in the store, so again, this was that 20% that actually show up, they go in, they make a purchase. On average, they're spending $80 in their store. So why is that relevant? Well, let's go into the next build. then this build is going to show us, okay, well, what is that, one store locator click? What does that translate into as far as value to my organization? And this is really value from a revenue dollars. So you can see just with this simple model, they're able to say, okay, that gets us to $3.20. So as we build on to the third component and the last one on this slide, what you'll see is there is an incremental lift in ROI that this store locator component within their mobile app was able to contribute to the bottom line of Adidas. And it was to the tune of 680%, which is quite significant. So now, as I look at this from a business value, from an ROI perspective, yes, we started the conversation with the practical how-to for mobile, but now we're able to translate this into real dollars of revenue. And again, this is the Adidas case study that they did. But when I look at, well, what if you could get the store locator clicks to a lower ratio? So not 1 in 5, but 1 in 4. What does that mean? So again, thinking about, could you optimize that application? Does that make it a little bit more sticky, more people wanting to use it, more people wanting to then go and visit the store because they have a more positive experience? Again, just another example, and I thought a very relevant case study for this conversation around customer value. But again, in my book, nobody better to tell you how you're doing and some of their experiences than an actual customer of HP's. And having Brian, who not only represents Vivid from a chapter leader perspective, he and I also co-chair the mobile special interest group. So Brian, I know you wanted to share just a little bit about your experience at USAA with mobile and what it's meant to your organization and the impact that you've been able to have.
Sure. Thank you, Todd. USAA is a financial services company that services the U.S. military and their family. Our mission is to provide for that financial security for all of our members. And being the U.S. military based, our membership can be anywhere around the world. And the use of mobile devices and technology is very important to them, and it's one of our fastest growing channels to where we have access to all of our applications, banking, insurance, investments, through our mobile application. So having the performance and seeing how well an application will perform is very crucial to us. As been mentioned earlier, typically, with the .com world, we always can see that we could wait 5 or 10 seconds, and it never was that bad, of a wait. But in the mobile world, having something come to you and serviced in less than 2 seconds is very important to maintain that whole experience from end to end for our member set and your customers as well. And that's why looking at performance is very critical to us. And as I look at performance, we do it across the full spectrum. As been mentioned earlier, we look at the back end, so performing against the web services and making sure your back end can perform, making sure that your carrier side can handle the bandwidth. Because you can see for us, having people across the world, different carrier conditions, even having to support a person who's on a aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean with a low-speed connection, still needs to have the same performance as anybody else in the world. So being able to do that network virtualization is very key. And the other key for us is also be able to measure the performance on the mobile device itself. So being able to use real devices and to measure that performance to make sure the app is not doing anything to adversely affect the phone itself, so where you're not draining the battery or you're using too much CPU or memory and those types of things. So it's something that you have to look at its entirety across the full spectrum. The HP tools definitely help in that area, and is something that you should always take into consideration so you can keep your member experience very high, and you can see that we have a very high rating of our mobile apps, not only in the Google Store, but also in the iTunes Store. And, if you continue focusing on the performance, you'll make sure you have that good experience for your members and customers. And that's all I was going to have on this slide, so we can go to the next slide. So right now, we'll open it up to questions. So if you have any questions, please go over into the control panel and type your questions in, and we'll respond to them shortly.
Thank you, Brian. This is Sylvia, and I'm back here. Shane, can you hear me? Just out test. Great. So we have a couple of questions here in the question area, and I'm going to read those out loud and have the participation of you guys. The first question is regarding virtualization. Do we have to implement virtual network virtualization, virtual user and service virtualization in order to test performance end-to-end from request to response? That's a good question. So do we need all of that, all of those solutions, or not really?
So I think of it more as a maturity curve. You know, first we need to make sure that we're doing basic performance testing as early in the life cycle as possible, in being in touch with our developers, our functional testers, to make sure we understand how the application is made and how it's being used by customers, so that we can represent both in our performance testing. And the first step might take place in a lab. It might be unit tests, and it might be in an isolated environment. But then as we progress through the life cycle, we want to include other components of that application outside of that isolated environment, such as the network and external services. And how we do that is through virtualization. The other approach to testing with those other components is actually very expensive. If you consider the cost, the time, and the unreliable nature of setting up these networks and environments, or say you're stubbing out services from the third party, there's a very high cost of overhead to the creation and management of those external components. So as a best practice, we're saying, as you progress through the life cycle and you're stepping out of the lab and into a more integrated environment, virtualize the parts of the puzzle that you don't control, wherever possible.
Oh, very good. Yeah, so then they can start with LoadRunner and then add on as they mature. Okay, very good, Shane. Thank you. So another question.
Before we move on, I mean, I guess there's another perspective that could be brought to this, and it's definitely a maturity curve thing. But you know, Brian from USAA, I mean, this is not something that they got to where they are with 4.5 stars on both the Google Play and the App Store by accident. And it was something that incrementally over time they absolutely needed to do. I guess if somebody, though, is making a decision to not do everything, just be prepared to be able to defend in front of your business and your technology teams and your customers and your employees why you chose not to. Because I think the impact that as you look at that business case and the ROI model that you're putting together is fairly significant. So if you're making a cognizant decision to not do something, at least be able to defend why you're not doing it, because I think that ROI and the value model that goes back to the core is going to be significant to your business. And again, knowing that people like USAA and the 3 other case studies that we had shared are leveraging these capabilities to deliver the value to their customers and stakeholders for all the right reasons, that might be a good blueprint to follow.
Thanks, Todd. Very good input. So the next question is, in Agile environment, how can we fit in these 3 steps, early stage, single user, and load and performance test, since the Agile has really short release?
I'm sorry, Sylvia, you cut out there at the end.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Yeah, in that Agile environment, how can you fit these 3 steps that we mentioned about early stage, single user, and load and performance testing, being that Agile has a very short release cycles?
Yeah, this is a great question. And Agile really doesn't say anything about performance testing, does it? So, we know that it's important. It's the first aspect of our of quality that a customer experiences is how well the app performs. If it doesn't pop up within a few seconds, it doesn't matter if the app is rock solid at that point. They've already moved on. So in an Agile environment, the key is testing early and often. We want to test the incremental features as they're added to the application. And in a very new application, that means unit testing. And it means leveraging unit tests for scalability. And as those components become more integrated, we assemble more of a baseline set of completed features that we're testing against. After a few sprints, we end up with a set of baseline tests that represent kind of our existing functionality, but it's important that we continue to test new incremental changes to the application as they're added. So we want to, again, take those unit tests that we hope our developers are creating. A recent Forrester study showed it was something like 68%, which means that 32% of developers are not doing unit testing in mobile applications. So hoping that they are, we can take those unit tests and run them at scale. HP LoadRunner Performance Center can be used to execute unit tests at scale, so that we're testing the early pieces of functionality before the application is completely ready. Now, this is not an exact science, of course. We need to understand how the application works. We need to work with the developers and make sure that what we're testing is actually relevant and reaches out to other components in a way that is relevant to performance. But doing that, we can get early feedback to the developers so that they're able to impact performance within the sprint, not 2 or 3 sprints behind or during a hardening sprint when nobody's focused on the functionality that was delivered 2 or 3 sprints ago. So it's very important that we're able to do that within the existing sprint where changes are being made.
Good, thanks, Shane. The next question is regarding to the emulators. So for the majority of the workload, is this done through emulators and using physical device or something like Perfecto?
So I believe in a mixed approach. Of course, there's debates on all of these subjects, and then there are lively debates. But I've always believed that the best approach is to get a mix of different inputs and conditions, and to be representative of our end users' state. So we can drive the bulk of our user load using virtual users, which represent the traffic that those users present to the application, so the requests, responses that are received by the mobile devices. And it's not important for the bulk of your user load that we actually represent our users with real devices. And it would be cost prohibitive to do so. So let's take an example of a 1,000 virtual user test or 1,000 user test. Having 1,000 devices is simply not scalable. It's not possible in most scenarios. So we would virtualize the vast majority of those users through a tool like LoadRunner to produce that traffic. And then for a small sampling of users, we can use Mobile True Client as an example, which produces the same traffic, but from an end user perspective. So we're getting the rendering side of the user behavior as well. Or we might have a sprinkling of real devices in a service such as Perfecto's Mobile Device Cloud, or another third party which can just as easily be used to present that traffic through a real device during our load test. If you're not using one of those services, you can simply run a handful of actual real devices with real people during that test to get a sampling of what performance is like. And the cool thing about that is you're getting a real sense of the application response, which you can use automation for all of the exact timing at a network layer, at an application layer. But when you put the device in someone's hand to actually test it while the application is being loaded, it can be a very enlightening experience. So I strongly believe in single-user performance testing early on, getting a real device on the application with network conditions that are realistic, and maintaining that throughout the life cycle so that you're always getting that checked. So how does the application feel now while we're loading it, for example?
Thanks, Shane. And we are having an amazing number of questions, but we don't have a lot of time. But I'm going to do 2 more questions here, and then we are going to answer all the other questions after the webinar, and you're going to have your question answered here. But yeah, let's go for these last two questions. One for you, Todd, and based on what even Shane was talking about, what can be so different when you replicate the real-time network around the world with HP network virtualization, or how to ensure it does not differ much? So basically, what can you ensure? What's the difference in using this real-time network around the world, or you can notice this difference?
So I guess, Sylvia, if I'm to cut through that question, it's really what is the accuracy of HP network virtualization versus the real world?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I love this question, and there's a number of reasons why, and you know, this could probably be its own webinar or maybe its own white paper that I should create. Let me know if that's something that would be interesting. But you know, I often ask people, great, you want to use real devices in the real world. Okay, how are you going to recreate that scenario in your pre-production lab? You know, are you going to go out and buy all these devices, and are you going to provide them to all your different development and test centers around the world, as well as all your development partners? And how's that going to work? You know, there's several examples. I mean, one was a large U.S.-based telecom that did all their offshore testing in China. Well, they got U.S. devices and shipped them over to China, so now they're testing from China on SIM cards that are U.S. based, so we can all, you know, do basic, you know, globe mapping, and know that that's not going to be an accurate representation. So there's several ways that people have tried it. The HP network virtualization capability, again, gives you the accuracy of real endpoint connections. So you may not be familiar with it, but there's numbers of ways that you can discover these network conditions. One is a library where there's tens of millions of endpoint captures that are done from over 52,000 different cities around the world. Again, that library is available to you as an HP network virtualization customer. There is a free app that you can download on Google Play or the App Store today that will also enable you, it's Network Catcher Express, to capture the conditions wherever you happen to be standing on any network, on any Android or iOS device. So again, the accuracy question, I'd like to take it off the table from the perspective of, you know, A, what are you doing today, and how is it that you're accurately able to capture these conditions and then accurately recreate them in your test environment every single time so that you get consistent results? Because in testing, again, being able to have a controlled environment that is repeatable is critical. Using production networks, that's about as far as you can get from controllable and repeatable.
Thanks, Todd. And then I just want to complement here because there was another similar question, but asking about if we support AT&T Verizon. Yes, we support all the networks. But I want to move on in the next question. That's the last question for today. And then we are going to answer your questions afterwards and send to you remotely. But the last question is for you, Shane. Does HP provide solutions to test performance for only mobile web apps, or also cover for native and hybrid applications? And the question is, can I do some trial of that? Can I test that? Can I have access to the software as a trial?
Yeah, absolutely. So great question. And the answer is that HP LoadRunner, HP products in this area, including LoadRunner, Performance Center, network and service virtualization, support more than just mobile web applications. We support native applications. We support hybrid applications across any platform, operating system, you name it. LoadRunner provides the widest range of methods for capturing device traffic, whether it's from an emulator, mobile web, browser, or from the device itself. We have multiple ways of capturing the traffic, not assuming that you have access to physical devices or not. So there's a number of choices there, and a very easy kind of process for capturing the traffic, even if it's your first try. So I would actually recommend for anyone who hasn't seen it, www.hp.com/go/LoadRunner. You can download version 12, which comes free with 50 virtual users built in, and that's a perpetual license. It's included.
Shane, did you say free?
Yep, it's 100%
Okay.
free, no cost, 50 virtual users. You can download it, try it, give it to your developers, have them integrate it with their development environment, do with it what you will, and it's free.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so we are a little bit more of the top of the hour. I just want to say a big thank you for attending this webinar. We do have another webinar coming very soon. That is April 24th. We are going to cover what's new for HP Performance Center LoadRunner version 12. And on May 21st, we are going to have another mobile performance testing in more detail. So stay tuned. We are going to send invitations to you, and we are going to also post also the answers for your questions that were not answered here live. Thank you very much, Shane and Todd, and thanks for attending our webinar today.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.